Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Just how would a Jarrell Miller and Anthony Joshua at Madison Square Garden, how would it play out? That's what I'm going to cover in this video. I've already covered how we got to this position, a bit messy, giving up Wembley, all that sort of stuff in another video, so I'm not going to delve back into that. And obviously some people were a little bit unhappy with some of my thoughts on that. But this video will focus solely on the Joshua Miller encounter, what we could maybe anticipate, expect, some of the things that we will be looking out for in the next few months. Because bear in mind, if this is finalized, and this is just initial thoughts here, so what are we, the start of February now, this fight is 4 months away. It is a long time between drinks, and who knows what could happen between now and then, especially in things like Jarrell Miller's weight. How heavy is he going to be for this? He's weighed, 315 plus for his last couple of fights, but he has been as low as 283 pounds just, a year, 18 months ago. And some of that could factor into this fight. But we'll get into some of that and more. So buckle in. Let's go. First thing to talk about is Anthony Joshua won't be the home fighter. That will be something new and different. Not everyone fights the same when they're away from home. But, he'll be facing a guy in Jarrell Miller where New York is Miller's home. He's campaigned there. Most of his fights have been in Brooklyn or in the New York area, and that's where he's comfortable. So if Miller has this home shot at Madison Square Garden, there will be some support for Jarrell Miller. But what is his level of popularity? Because that will ultimately influence how many Jarrell Miller fans are in the Garden at the time of the fight. And I think it's fair to say there's going to be quite a number of Anthony Joshua fans, either from the New York area or, wider throughout the United States, will come and see Anthony Joshua. And then obviously there'll be some traveling fans that come from the United Kingdom. But Miller, we don't really know what is his support base because, a big partisan crowd. I mean, if we just hark back just a week or two to the Adam Kovnatski fight against Gerald Washington, very partisan Kovnatski crowd, and that really set a tone and an influence at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn. And that was really apparent, and that probably was something that was in Adam Kovnatski's favor. Will Jarrell Miller have the same? But even then, if it's a mixed reaction, it's not quite the sort of stadium atmosphere or the big hype and hoopla of the UK fights that Joshua is used to, being adored. If it's a bit mixed, boos nestled in there with chairs, and it's a bit sort of, all over the show, how is he going to react, one, to the atmosphere, the crowd, and it being a bit of a different environment? Because, sometimes traveling fighters don't perform as well as they do at home. We've seen that over time. In this instance, Joshua says he's going to have, if he does fight in the United States, he would have part of his training camp, or this is what Eddie Hearn has said on his behalf, part of his training camp in the United States to, get used to it, and probably it's going to be to help sell the fight and promote it, little bits and pieces, especially in Fight Week. This will be the first splash in the United States, so I'm sure they're going to really be pushing this, trying to make sure it's a big event, and DAZN needs these big events, a growing subscription service. It wants, it stars Anthony Joshua and Canelo Alvarez to really perform, be big draws, get people into the app. So they're going to be investing a lot of time, effort and money, and hopefully the money, sort of flows onto the undercard as well, because they will probably need a decent undercard to help sell this, in terms of getting people along, to sell out the venue, but also getting people watching at home. The bigger the card, and if it's this Joshua's first event in the United States, you better believe they'll be throwing everything at it. And if we move next to the opponents themselves, obviously Anthony Joshua, the bigger man, 6'6", a couple of inches on Jarrell Miller, but he is going to be the lighter man by about, 65, 70 pounds. Anthony Joshua will probably come in somewhere around 245 pounds. Jarrell Miller, it's a bit of a question. He's weighed roughly, 315 to 320 pounds the last couple of fights. So how big will Jarrell Miller come in for this fight? And maybe that will be influenced by his tactics for the fight. I would have thought with someone like Anthony Joshua, who will be able to give Miller a bit of movement, he will be able to probably hit him almost at will because Miller's defense is very leaky. Miller will want to, I would have thought, be slightly lighter, have a bit more head movement because that's one of the knocks on Jarrell Miller. He's very hittable, but he takes the shots so he can get away his own work, and he brings the pressure. He tries to wear you down through pressure and volume of punches. He's got a very good gas tank, and he throws a lot of punches, and eventually that starts to demoralize opponents. Gerald Washington was a classic example, just ground him into the dust. Other guys like Bogdan Dinu started well, especially I think it was the second round of that fight. Dinu looked $1 million, made Jarrell Miller look a bit slow and plodding. But that is actually Jarrell Miller. He doesn't really do anything complicated. He comes forward, throws punches, looks for his opportunities, and tries to overwhelm you with pressure and volume over time. That's kind of, in a nutshell, his game plan. And he actually said ahead of that Dinu fight, that he was going to pick his spots a bit more and try to, be a bit more selective with his punching. And when he tried to do that early on, it didn't really work from him, and it made Dinu look quite good, who was just sort of dancing around the ring, picking Miller off. But as soon as Jarrell Miller in the third round upped the work rate, Dinu found it hard to keep up. He couldn't really get a respite. He was under constant pressure, lots of punches coming in, and he was eventually overwhelmed, and Jarrell Miller got the stoppage in the fourth round. So Miller's game plan will be quite obvious what it's going to be. Whereas with Anthony Joshua, he's given us different looks in different fights. Joseph Parker, he was a bit more of a tactician, a bit more cautious, giving Parker a lot of respect. Whereas with the Alexander Povetkin fight, he said he was going to be more aggressive, and he was more aggressive, ultimately getting a stoppage. But with Povetkin, he did weather an early storm, but he came through it, wore Povetkin down, and ultimately clobbered him, took him out in the seventh round. And it may actually be something similar with Miller. It may take a number of shots to really grind him down. The chin, it will be there to hit at times, and Jarrell Miller's not going to be hard to fight. He will be coming at Joshua, but can Anthony Joshua get Miller off him? Can he get his respect? Make him think twice about coming in, because if Miller takes too much punishment early, maybe he will fight in a different way. But Joshua's probably going to have to land something significant early and often to really get Miller's respect, because if Miller starts walking through Joshua's punches, which no one's really been able to do so far, then it could spell problems for Anthony Joshua later in the fight, especially, as he starts to tire. And that has been a question, his gas tank over time. But Miller, he's obviously just keeps coming forward all night. So if Joshua can't hurt him with, a couple of big bombs early, it'll be interesting to see how it pans out as the fight drags on into those later rounds. It could be a question, because if Miller gets through the first 6 or 7 rounds, it really could be quite interesting. He really hasn't been fading badly in his fights, whereas we have seen in some other fights with Anthony Joshua, he does tire. But Miller's chin, it's the question, how good is it? We've seen him tagged before, hit with a couple of big shots by Gerald Washington, and there was one instance in their fight where it looked like he was visibly rocked. I think it's fair to say that Anthony Joshua hits a degree harder than Gerald Washington. So if he can catch him flush a few times, perhaps Jarrell Miller is really going to be in trouble. But it's the thing, we just haven't seen his chin tested often enough. He hasn't faced a number of big punches for us to really know how good that chin is. We've heard he's got a very good chin. The couple of times where he has been, clipped decently, he stood up to it well. But it hasn't been under sustained punishment. Whereas someone like Anthony Joshua probably going to find the target a bit more often than some of these other guys that he's faced. But it's going to be an interesting matchup for a number of reasons, simply because I think we just don't know how good Jarrell Miller is. And in some ways that may end up counting against Anthony Joshua if he stops Miller early with a couple of really stunning shots. And then some people will come out and say Jarrell Miller was a hype job. I think he's deservedly, ranked in the top 10 through the guys that he's faced so far. Sure, it's been a bit thin more recently, Adamek and Dinu, but he has beaten those top 30, top 40 guys in Marius Wok, Johan Dorper, and Gerald Washington. I mean, Wok and Dorper, they were on the slide, but they were still around that top 30, top 40 range. So they were decent names for him to, put on his resume. But it's missing that next step for us to really know how good Miller is. He may just show us in this fight, or he may get blown out by Anthony Joshua. Time will really tell, but this is my initial thoughts. How are you expecting the fight to play out? Are there any factors like it being an away fight that could influence how it pans out? Can Joshua, not being the home fighter, still rise to the occasion? Does he just have too much ammunition for Jarrell Miller? What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.